Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. My name is Egberto Willies, your host. Once again, we're honored to have Patrick Lovell here in-house with us to continue this very important discussion, which is a 5-part series. This is the 4th part. Patrick Lovell is the producer of The Con, where he discussed the fraudulent mortgage, and we're going to have a issue with words here, and the shenanigans, but in his part, the racketeering that took down the economy in 2008. Today we begin the series, or today we continue the series, how the billionaire class got away with their power accumulation over the last 14 years. Lovell calls himself the producer with the $71 trillion truth that the entire system depends on, and hid from everyone that still doesn't get it. Patrick, thank you so kindly for being here. And also thank you for the work that you've done on The Con and the work that you've done on the the other website that we're...
New Deal.
Say it again?
TheCleanNewDeal.org.
The CleanNewDeal.org. Okay. On the first episode, we covered the now. The second episode, we covered the election and what it entails. The third episode, we spoke about the billionaire domination. Today, we'll talk about the Biden administration, what came through that, how we got here. And of course, the fifth episode, we will wrap things up by telling you folks, there is hope and what you can actually do. Patrick, let's talk about what Biden did. In my humble opinion, in as much as I consider Biden a neoliberal too close to the banking sector, I mean, the guy's from Delaware after all, and all these other places, with the policies that he's passed, as much of a neoliberal that he has likely been the most progressive policies, bar none. More so than Obama, definitely more so than Clinton. So let's take the discussion on and start there.
Absolutely. And thank you for that kind introduction. And my appreciation for you is equal. Your task at hand, given your continuity and your constant revelations to the audiences writ large that are looking for direction, is so monumentally important, Egberto. And I want to emphasize, while I address this question, that we live in a continuum. Our entire lives are a continuum. Society is a continuum. History is a continuum. So you can't just identify one piece of something in a vacuum and expect that to suddenly turn the light bulb on and everything makes sense. You have to look at the entire picture. And the orchestration of the Biden administration, given his 50 years in politics, to your point, given the neoliberal, his interaction in his parlance, his dance with the machine, the way the machine is organized, particularly out of Delaware, i.e. LLCs and corporate, juggernauts, by the legalities of being able to hide money structures, given the kind of challenges that corporations face in the so-called skewed rhetoric of capitalism. But to your point about him being a progressive, I mean, let's just take a quick look at him commuting the sentences of, I don't know, I think more
1,500, a whole lot. Yeah.
Right. 1,500 in a very short period of time, which definitely took me by surprise. And you have to think about that in context to the crime bill that he and during the Clinton administration have fostered, that literally turned on the jets of the prison industrial complex when you look back at it, right? Which then gave us a prison population of the largest prison population on the planet, given the fact that we're, 25% of the world's population. I mean, much less. No, we have 25%.
4% with 25% of the prisoners.
Yeah, exactly. And that was part and parcel to these incredibly baked-in schemes, methodologies of lobbyists and the legal structure and the police unions and all of the other kinds of things, not to mention what happens in states, right? There's this giant sort of apparatus of all of the elements that are involved in the prison industrial system, of which, of course, many, many people 1,500 were, in situations, many of whom were on death row for, situations that all of the evidence might not have been there. So in terms of a progressive ideology, I mean, obviously people on the progressive side don't want a capital punishment, right? They've been trying to move away from capital punishment for decades. Never in my life have I seen a president commute so many sentences. Have you?
No, I have not.
So the point being that was many of, I like to kind of consider power, this sort of scenario, as you have a Faustian bargain, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody always has to, and I think I saw an incredible Mel Brooks comedy back in the 70s where everybody was miserable. So that means everybody was happy, right? Because nobody got what they wanted. And that's the idea of compromise. And that's the idea of politics and power and everything else. But as you move up the strata and you move up to the sort of organizers in the construction of power, particularly in the so-called deep state, which I'm just going to use rhetorically. I'm not going to mean it literally at the moment, but rhetorically outside of the box, and people that can maneuver behind the scenes to make bills happen, to make funding happen, to make X, Y, and Z happen. You look at this situation where the Democratic Party, particularly with Biden at the head, became this technocratic, I might finish off with feudalism, a technocratic feudalism, because of ultimately the revolving door, right? Mm-hmm. So you have a president that was there for 50 years. He had to come in at a very monumentally important time after the insurrection with, all things January 6th in the direction we were going with, Trump doing something that had never been done in our history. Although I did find out, and I prefaced the other day with Rachel Maddow, had said that during the presidential run of McCarthy, that they had also used some of the same methodologies in terms of using electioneering, scheming, and trying to steal the election and all that stuff. But what that means in context to Biden's administration is we've got to look at a couple of things, right? The infrastructure bill, and ultimately, ending up, when you start there and you move on to the commuting of these sentences, yes, he was as progressive as they get, but did he ever challenge the corruption that he started off his administration proclaiming?
No. And I want to add to that because I look at it, when people gave Obama a hard time for, I don't know if you remember that there was this group called OFA, it was called Obama for America. And then they changed the name, or I don't remember exactly how it was, Obama for America, and then they changed the name. But he had a hell of an infrastructure built. And after he built that infrastructure and came into office, that grassroots network, which was huge, included Republicans. It was a huge network. Right. They just about let it slide because it was not a neoliberal infrastructure. A grassroots movement brought him in, and the neoliberal infrastructure ate him up.
So true.
And I think it's important for folks to understand that I always talk about, when they talk about the individual, the president, I always talk about there being the individual president, and then there is something called the presidency. And the individual president doesn't have full control of the presidency. The neoliberal infrastructure does. The one thing that I think Trump did is he disrupted the standard, the neoliberal infrastructure as we know it, but to create one that is even more corrupt than the current neoliberal infrastructure. Your thoughts?
Well, that takes us back to the big lie. And let's think of all things Steve Bannon and him coming out of Goldman Sachs and ironically being the money manager for Larry David, among other things. And with, his background with his father being an electrician coming out of the Navy, being a part of, the old sort of generation of the greatest generation, so to speak, and still having all of that DNA in his head, but understanding the methodologies of the mechanics of, like you said, the neoliberal structure, of which, what did Steve Bannon revert back to? He kept calling it the fourth turning. What he was referring to, ultimately, when I look at it through the long lens, is this element of this white supremacy in the United States that went back, obviously we come out of slavery into Jim Crow, but it was so organized through America First when we started to see, and I couldn't think about this name, and I think in episode number 2, when we kind of just preface briefly the John Birch Society. Mm-hmm. The John Birch Society in the 50s was constituted mainly of Texas wildcatter oil men who bridge this gap between the new money, right? The new paradigm, the new aristocracy, as it were, the new confederacy, but they tapped into what was the previous paradigm, which was white supremacy, Christo nationalism. Okay, and so this started to manifest with Steve Bannon, that went into MAGA Part 2. Well, sorry, MAGA, which was this continuum, right?
Of Tea Party Part 1, yeah.
That's right. So it goes John Birch, then it goes into, let's just call it all thing Koch brothers, which then after the great financial crisis leads to the Tea Party. And what always amazes me, Egberto, is how quickly these guys on the right can exploit and capitalize on a crisis, which of course, those of us on the progressive side, particularly, the Democratic side, the humanists, all things civil rights side. Let's put it that way, right? That the fundamental nature of civil rights, human rights are above the production, let's say, profitability in the hierarchy of, let's say, priorities for a government, i.e., the government of, by, and for the people is my point. So when we get into Biden versus the vacuum that he was coming out of because of all things Trump and the insurrection and Steve Biden and all of these things, again, the terms of this three-dimensional chess, right? About money, resources, organization, and continuity within the structures of which I had prefaced the other day, i.e. of the muckraking journalist Upton Sinclair. The greatest way you get somebody not to understand something is to make sure that his paycheck is dependent upon it, right? The outcome. So you get this perversion within the methodology, the mechanics of the neoliberal establishment, that you're absolutely right. Here comes the far right with a sledgehammer to the let's call it what they think of it as a continuum of FDR's social state, the government of, by, and for the people, which they claim in their sort of methodology that the United States was never actually created to configure. Their argument is, no, people who have amassed central power can control their paradigms, whether it's in slavery, whether it's, depending on what time period we're talking about in the United States. Go ahead.
I'm glad you brought up that analysis, and including the white supremacy portion. What's interesting about white supremacy, it doesn't even benefit the masses of white people. It is amazing, but what it does is it creates a carnality. In other words, I'm taking your money, I'm taking all which is yours, but you know what? You have not taken your whiteness away, and that has some sort of a privilege over everything else. So you stick with me in as much as I'm ripping you off. I'm taking your goodwill. I'm taking your value. But you know what you got? You ain't those people. And if when you look at the folks that voted for Kamala, not that Kamala is the best person, because Kamala still falls under some of the neoliberal concepts as well.
Absolutely. That's why she was put in that position.
Exactly. And so, but when you look at that, you and understand who are the people who voted for her and who voted against her, you can see how that white supremacist carnality works. So it was either whiteness and people don't want to accept it when I say it. I think race is one of the most stupid constructs there is. It is the most ridiculous thing one can count on, but it is who we are as a society. And what has happened in this election, more so than any, is yes, all the economic things are there, but racialized, it allows people to make the wrong choices because they worked on what their carnality is telling them, those external forces that are telling them, be scared. They're coming to get you, and your whiteness or your approximation of whiteness. Because some people say, "Hey, well, black people voted for Trump. Hey, well, Latinos voted for Trump." Yeah, proximity to whiteness is safety in the psyche that many are actually putting out there, and it is such a hard concept for many to get, my brother.
Well, to that point too, I mean, as it incorporates some of the the African-American voters for Trump, and same with Latinos, a lot of that was patriarchy type stuff. And not to mention,
exactly.
Yeah, but the point that encapsulates everything that you had just said, was articulated brilliantly, which tells the whole story from LBJ back in the 60s when he said, if you can convince the lowest rung white guy that he's higher on the ladder than the highest rung black guy, you can pick his pockets all day. When I learned that, I was like, oh my God, that is control fraud.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. And so when we talk about the new robber barons versus the new Confederacy, I'm suggesting to your audience through this prism, not suggesting, I'm through
you're making it clear.
I'm making it clear the vision that unfortunately the Harris Walsh campaign chose not to. I think Tim Walsh would have gone this direction had he had the information eventually. But there was this weird. So power never relinquishes anything without demand. We both know that, right? And so let's go back to where Biden started his administration for just a brief second to kind of think about where we were in that transition. Okay, well, first of all, I want to make this because this will make even more sense. When Obama came in the first time, the first thing that he did was he made sure that lobbyists didn't have access to the White House for, I believe, 90 days. It was like 70 to 90 days. There was this point of contention. He wrote this, populist mandate. He was like, he was going to break this structure of influence, of special interest influence, right? So fast forward to after Trump's insurrection and all the chaos that's happening. And we just wanted so badly to just kind of wipe our hands of this nauseating 5,000 plus lies, the impeachment, all of the insanity that was going on with Trump that led to the insurrection. It was like, just get this guy out of our space. Let's move on. The first thing that Biden started to do was he started to manifest this like, look, we're going to puncture corruption. We are not going to allow the special interest billionaires to constitute what it is that we're going to do. And right away, we saw the infrastructure bill. And remind me of the other name, because it changed names of the two bills that happened right before COVID.
You're talking about the IRA. The investment of it's the IRA, and the infrastructure bill was the IRA, and the other one was I'll keep on going.
It was a monumental reset to take us back to a nation that we had kind of gotten used to over the course of the last 4 decades. Now, for better or for worse, all of those things from, let's say, Reagan. Well, I don't want to say Reagan because he was the domino to this whole thing, but let's say Clinton through everything that manifested, which each part has its own storyline. But there was a sense of, America's got its faults, but at the same time, there is integrity to the system. We can't expect the lights to run properly. We can't get to go visit our grandmother in Poughkeepsie because the airlines are going to get. There's a sort of framing of normalcy, right? So when Trump comes in, everything's out the window. It's like, what the hell is this? It's like we don't even have professionals inside the White House. We don't even have professionals anymore that are guiding us. It was like we had always expected and anticipated that, look, the adults are in the room. They'll take care of business. They'll guide us forward. We can have ideological, battles on the side. We can deal with all of these things. But the long and the short of it is, let's look at what happened during Trump that would manifest Biden, right? So first of all, we have right when Trump is elected, we have the Me Too movement, right? The Me Too movement is like, okay, wait a second. We've had decades and decades and decades of powerful, rape within systems that we're finally going to, we're going to purge. That's what it was, because Trump at the time was the ultimate sort of expression of that, right? So we saw like millions, probably hundreds of thousands of women protest throughout all cities in America that were demanding, no, this is unacceptable. This man in the White House, who is the face of our rape, quite frankly, right? We're going to challenge that. And they did. And what happened in the immediate aftermath of that? We saw basically purges in Hollywood. We saw legal challenges. We saw this and that and the other. We saw some changes in corporate America that would then lead to potentially DEI type stuff. But ultimately, what we had was a movement in a silo. Then we had the continuation of the perpetuation of what we had seen for decades, young Black African-American men being shot by the police, right? Which culminated in Minneapolis with George Floyd. That leads to, of course, all things BLM. But let's not, at least we forget, during that time period, we have COVID. So we have this like strange thing where everybody's isolated, but yet there's this outrage, and then things are starting to fluctuate and go back and forth, and it all goes through this chaos, and then it ends up in this sort of tumultuous scenario of the big lie that is promulgated because of the vacuum of all of this chaos through Steve Bannon to promulgate the insurrection. I think I put Steve Bannon as the mastermind because Steve Bannon was in the middle, and this is not what the January 6th investigation would reveal, but the likes of Eric Prince from Blackwater, big money like the Mercers, Sheldon Adelson or Miriam Adelson at this point. And then, others I could go through all of probably Peter Thiel and those sorts. So the January 6th investigation would ultimately just put all of the onus on Donald Trump. And we know that Donald Trump's a mastermind of nothing. What we're perpetuating here is this sort of understanding that there was this entire situation that was manifesting because of what you just said. Identity, racial identity politics, all of these things would manifest that would keep our eye on chaos, that we've been involved with what we call the culture wars since the 60s. And suddenly all of this stuff is like this battle between the hegemony of, let's say, the white supremacy expressed through Donald Trump, through all of the machinations and the minions of what I call the new Confederacy versus what they call the deep state, which is neoliberalism. Okay. So ultimately, what does that get us into with Biden? Well, everybody's trying to turn the page as quickly as they can, get on to reestablishing America that is stable, that people can expect things to work, that the law is going to work, that we're going to have opportunity, that the bad guys aren't in control. Here's a sort of stable scenario that we all were accustomed to, quite frankly, since the 70s, even though a lot of stuff's happening internationally and below the surface. So that starts the Biden administration in a way that was like, okay, let's say forces that were ready to get off of fossil fuel, forces that were ready to end all of these different paradigmatic problems, forces that we could progressively move America forward. We were willing to say at that stage of the game, whew, at least it's not Trump.
Exactly. I mean, I think you nailed it. By the way, just to remind you, while you were talking, I wanted, got that I wanted to find that he was responsible for the American Rescue Plan Act.
That's all right.
Right. That's one you're looking for, as well as the Infrastructure Investment Act. And of course, there's the CHIPS Act and all these other pieces. I mean, like I said, the guy brought a whole lot. I am not exactly sure why they didn't market it as well as they should. I really think that had a lot to do with who their
Can I comment on that?
Absolutely.
So this is the thing that I think has been the biggest disconnect at all, which connects what we're revealing to your audience and why this played out the way it did. Okay. We had inflation. Don't forget, we had the supply chain issues. We had people choked. We had the whole idea, the issues of supposedly, your eggs and your milk and so on and so forth costing so much more, which ironically, many of us now understand that we've just seen the greatest travel surge in American history and more spending on credit cards. So it's like, oh, really? Yeah, you guys.
Quick interjection. That is the hypocrisy within ourselves that I try to explain to people. You can't say the economy is bad while you're spending more so than ever. And, you can, I mean, those things are mutually exclusive. Right. Even if you follow what economist Richard Wolff has pointed out, which is, yes, our spending ability comes from increased debt, but still it is a good economy if you're spending.
Okay, but this ties together everything that we're talking about. So, for example, the disconnect that we talked about yesterday was basically the engine of the golden goose of American manufacturing in the middle class that manifested after World War II, after we got into this neoliberal world globalistic paradigm, then led to Americans rolling loans. Okay, this is financialization. This is the middleman of working out all of these different sorts of three-card Montes, quite frankly, based on short-term growth that can manifest if you have liar's loans or liar's credit or liar's economy, for example. And so most people should understand in their own lives, look, are you living beyond your means?
Right.
Are you spending more on your credit card than you should because you've got Christmas coming up? You want to you live up to the Joneses. You want your family happy. You want all of these things, but yet you're going to be right in the middle of an election where you're going to say, look, I can't survive this way. So the disconnect is that for the top 10% of the country, things have been very good for the last 14 years.
Absolutely.
Why, Egberto? Because of everything that I am revealing to you. Now, typically, those who own real estate, those who practice in securities that have investment portfolios, they tend to come from the educated class, right? Many cases, they tend to be professionals, right? Mm-hmm. So when they look around at their world view, their paradigm, and they see that their portfolios had gone through the roof for 14 years, that their real estate had gone through the roof, that they have ample money to spend because they had money, and then Wall Street's throwing them more money, and more opportunity because their values are moving forward and they've got equity and everything, and then they can play ball the way the game is played. They're looking around and they're saying to themselves, what's the problem? Mm-hmm. 90% of the people are on that wheel where they've got to work 2 or 3 jobs to where they can barely pull off enough income to go see a basketball game, let alone what they're going to buy at the grocery store. And they see the cost of, bread and items that their family wants, and they got to make hard choices, right? So all of this stuff is a manifestation of the economic global paradigm that has evolved over the course of literally now 7 decades. And I think it came to a ruptured end in 2008. It was over. The facade was over. This system doesn't work. You call it capitalism, and it is capitalism, but there's more to the story. I call it corporate fascism, undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses the full faith and credit of the United States to guarantee the mafiocracy, and corporate corruption burns and fuels fascism. That's the last 14 years, Egberto, because when you get into the Biden administration, it was more growth for the top 10%, and the 90% continued to struggle. Who does that work for, Egberto?
Oh, that worked. It worked fine for Trump, for the liars, or for those folks that want you to believe that the system is good. I mean, this is the thing that we're fighting constantly, Patrick. And I want to say something in a sort of a bifurcated way. When I speak about the economy being good, I don't want you to misunderstand that I am saying for the 90%, the economy is what it's supposed to be. What I do want to say is, if you take a look at the economy, if you take a look at the recovered Obama economy, Trump's economy, I'm talking about for that 90% we're talking about. If you take a look at those three and Biden's economy, including stimuli and all these other things, right? It turns out that while some would tell you, well, the average American person has $5,000 less in their pockets in that particular year, when you add all the benefits that were given back, that has not been the case. I am absolutely with you that the 90% are getting screwed. That's why we do what we do. That's why I believe capitalism is a fraud. And you just in effect said it when you pointed out that those people on the top percent, their monies are growing at 7, 8, 10, 20% a year. The people at the bottom are either losing money or growing at 1%. That is an economy. It's one economy. And if those economies are growing that way, what it tells you in the pie chart is that 10% continues to take a bigger portion of the economy. And when we talk about unsustainability of an economic system that performs that way, the integral tells you that eventually that pie will occupy the entire damn pie. And the result is what? Indentured servitude, slavery. In other words, right. you work, you accumulate nothing.
Let me point out the obvious, though, because, and I don't mean this to sound kind of sarcastic, but I want you to think about this, Egberto. Brother, we have socialism.
Yes.
We have monumental socialism.
For the wealthy.
For the criminal class.
Exactly.
That's what I am revealing to you. So look,
I agree.
So look, ideologically, I understand what the country is in terms of its dynamism and its construction. Okay. I studied political science. I've been in this game for a long time. I'm a producer. I'm 56 years old. I've seen a lot in my lifetime. I understand that the United States is a hybrid. Okay. For better or for worse, you've got all sorts of different scenarios. In some cases, it's free market. In some cases, it's socialism. Anybody who doesn't understand that the police and our public schools and our military and so on and so forth, that's socialism. Of course we have socialism. Is anybody against the military who's on the far right? Of course not. You like socialism, okay? Whatever, especially when you're in and you served, then you come back and you want veterans benefits and all of the other things that are important to your sustainability, okay? So yeah, you got to have a hybrid system across the board. But what I'm revealing to you, that in this great sort of conceptualization that we talked about, and I was trying to think of the Greek philosopher going back to 2,000 years ago. I'm pretty sure it was Aristotle. But all of these terms, kleptocracy and corporatocracy, and these were manifested literally at that time period in the context of democracy. Democracy has to have the balance of an informed populace, people that can actually perform the way that the informed populace demands by proving themselves to the dynamism. Go ahead.
Repeat that, because I think that's, for people who look at the third world, some third world countries that have a strong person, a lot of times they're like, we need to institute democracy there right away. I think what you just said was magic. And let me explain how magical that was, Patrick. To have a democracy, only the people have to be educated en masse. One of the reasons the right wants to take books away, one of the reasons the right does all these things is they need an uneducated population that cannot critically think. If I have 10 bushels of corn and I am educated, I understand that even if I'm not completely satiated, that I still need to save of those 20 bushels, 1 bushel to grow for the next year. We can't eat it. An educated population knows that. An uneducated population sees, I'm still hungry. There's still a few bushels of corn. Let me go eat it without being able to critically think of what that means for the future. That 2 sentences you said there nailed it. Continue, my brother.
Well, I'm so grateful for that. It just came from the heart, and it's so beautiful. But what I learned a long time ago, Egberto, the longer I go in my education, and trust me, I learn every single day.
All of us do.
I never stop learning. And
absolutely.
That's the brilliance of the system, the way it's designed.
I am learning from this conversation.
Thank you. And what I learned and what I knew a long time ago, but I had to go through this process. What we're in the midst of, Egberto, for the most part, particularly as it relates to media and communication and informing people, is that things have been actually destroyed in a media context and fractured, because I'm in the business of media. I've been a producer for a long time, and I've seen the evolution of this because of the money incentive. And everything is generated by incentives, by the way. But the producers always have to find eyeballs by any means necessary. So we created this situation going back to the 90s where it's actually giving the information to people the way they want to consume it. Okay. So this crazy sort of perverse sort of the truth is not the truth. The truth is what people want to hear, the truth that gets echoed in their echo chambers. And what we've created is this like massive amount of misinformation, because nobody can tell the truth. Because if you're mainstream media gets paid by the system that I'm revealing to you. And not by my cold, dead hands will I give up the power, first and foremost. But for the rest of the people that are further down in terms of resources and being able to reach the audiences, like you said yesterday, you've been throttled down, I've been throttled down. But you've got these audiences, for example, out there, and I'm going to name some names, but just to be a little critical, just to make the point, guys like, for example, Kyle Kalitsky, right, who's not a journalist. He's not somebody who he studied political science, and he's an opinion op-ed type of guy reacting to the moment. But what he does is he creates content to be in the groundswell of what everybody else is talking about. Same with Cenk Uygur, same with whoever. And they've all been ultimately manipulated by the giant tentacles of somebody like Elon Musk, who can foment all sorts of information through clickbait and hate schemes and this and that to get people to talk about everything but what the core of the problem is, that it's imperative that we have an informed populace. And so what I learned a long time ago, and this is just kind of my own philosophical construct, that, and I learned this after my first go around when I made my first documentary called Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream. When I realized the paradox is that the entirety of this so-called democracy that is led by a capitalistic system that is built for the shareholders, supposedly, gets marionetted by a corporate board of revolving door, which is nothing more than the way of tyranny, the way of kings. And so what I thought in terms of the premise of people's ability to kind of navigate through this life, that there are two columns of our soul, my friend. You've got character, integrity, honesty, decency, dignity versus hypocrisy, duplicity, and complicity. The direction you go determines the outcome. And when you take that ideology up the specter of power, it's absolute power corrupts absolutely. Bastiat said in the 17th century that when a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. Go ahead.
Oh, man, you keep coming up with these great phrases. I want to tie that to our listeners, to the insurance company. Notice what he just said. What these charlatans do is they make the evils that they do legal, and thus it's no longer evil. Let's give an example here. Just happened. Luigi Mangione just murdered an executive who, and by the way, but I have to preface this being a radio person, being on air and using our airwaves. Murder is never justified in our society. Okay? Now, however, Luigi Mangione took a gun and murdered a CEO whose policies have affected the deaths of not one person as Luigi Mangione killed, but hundreds of thousands of American citizens were killed by the policies instituted by the executives in these companies. Listen to what our brother just said. Brother Patrick Lovell just said that what these charlatans do is they make legal the evils that they do, but if you do it upon them, you pay the price. It is unlawful. For them, it is not. Continue, my brother. Thank you for pointing it out.
Well, I appreciate it. Again, this is a wonderful symmetry because, the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. This is called deception. Mm-hmm. This is the basis of fraud. Fraud is illegal. Fraud is not shenanigans because fraud has different degrees of accountability based on the evidence, which is our system. Because fraud, when you deceive to thieve, you are committing a crime. So it's just like stealing someone's purse, just like stealing cigarettes at the whatever that we see cops so easily put a stranglehold on a guy who can't defend himself in court. But they're not going to do that to the CEO, Mark Thompson, who has absolute control with his minions of corporate attorneys that are stacked 10 deep that are all working for what we call the number, which is perverse incentives based on modern executive compensation, which you call capitalism, and justifiably so, but I call socialism because of what it leads to ultimately when you have the full faith and credit of the United States that will provide tens of trillions of dollars to the corporation, the thievery corporation.
Our money.
Yes, which is our money. And so I'll ask you this question in return, okay? The dynamism of the American spirit is what manifested us to be a phenomenally, unbelievably successful country. The achievement of our sciences, of our industry, of our practice, which was all predicated, and you might call it a facade, and many of you might roll your eyes and say to yourself, it's all bull. but the American dream, because the American dream was never available to many, many people. That much is true, i.e. Obama saying, and this is the next step in order to form a more perfect union, right? It's never perfect. Man is flawed. But that's why we have laws and accountability. That's why I say it's about character and integrity. So let me preface this question to you, given all of the stuff that we saw with the Biden administration that was going the right direction. But by doing this, for example, one hand tied behind the back, to hold corruption accountable. Why? Because we know the DNC is funded by the same entities that put these people in office for the last 5 decades. What do you think was going to happen when absolute corruption strangles the American situation to where chaos runs amok? 2 things. You could potentially go the way of chaos and revolution, i.e. what Mangione is kind of signifying with his, act. And I will reiterate what I said the other day. If Mangione had understood what I've been revealing in the Clean New Deal, hopefully he would have acted a lot more focused on being able, which is what we're going to get to in the next episode. But there are ways to recalibrate this situation if the American people are informed, because I have to ask this question to everyone to ponder, especially at an age where we're going to talk about, for example, with Doge, that they're going to somehow extract $2 trillion from the federal budget to what ends, while Elon Musk has made $171 billion since the election after throwing. This is absurd. And the American people looking around doing nothing, thinking that you can watch another national championship, which I will be doing, trust me, like everybody else, with excitement and anticipation. But that does not make it such that I don't think about the situation at hand, right? What are we going to do given all of these things that are coming down the pike, which is simply fascism? I need to reiterate this last point to you before you move on. Is there better ways, my friend, to spend $71 trillion than to about 300,000 people, okay, for corruption?
Who got it? Yeah, absolutely, yes. And that is what we talk about tomorrow. I don't want you to tell us what we do today. 4 parts. The 4 parts tells the problem. The last part tells a solution that all of us can be a part of. Now, I want to reiterate one thing and another good point that you make. When you talk about America being great, America having all these things, America is great because America has great people. America has good people. I mean, all, on Christmas Day, I got into this discussion, and my daughter and many others were saying, why are you so idealistic in your belief that people are good? And I say, because I talk to them. I speak to them one-on-one, not as a part of a cabal, not as a part of groupthink, but I speak to folks as individuals, and they all want the same things. We all want the same things. We have allowed externalities from the criminals that Patrick speaks about all of the times to influence the thought process, because the problem with good peoples as well is they are also wanting to believe their leaders. They're wanting to believe authority. That's what good people do. If authority is good, when we had in Panama the dictator called Omar Torrijos Herrera, he built great things. He was a dictator, but he built great things, and he treated people with humanity, etc. Then we got, of course, Noriega. He had some serious problems. And again, people want to follow their leaders. Democracy is different than autocracy in that people are, in a democracy, if people are educated and people are good, which most people are, you can survive. Now, here's the issue, Patrick. There's this thing that I don't know if you remember that movie. I think it was called Wall Street, where that
was the reason I became a producer.
There you go. And he came and he said, greed is good, and capitalism is based on this theory that everybody is greedy. It's the biggest lie out there. Everybody wants to survive, and everybody wants sufficiently to live a good life. If everybody was greedy, you would never have a CEO making millions of dollars, because they would want that $1 million and they would allow him to have it. If people were greedy, they won't allow all those people that are taking advantage of them to take advantage of them. So We have to stop believing the lie. And tomorrow we are going to go into to solutions with Brother Patrick, and we are going to have a special guest, Rose and Rabiola Miele. If I said the name wrong, I'm sure Patrick will correct me. But anyway, Patrick, we are coming close to where we need to wrap it up in the next 5 minutes or so. So why don't you wrap up with regards to, here's what I'd like you to frame. We've gone over 3 and change hours of what's wrong. Frame those 3 or 4 hours in 5 or 6 minutes. And then let's tell folks what we're going to talk about to end this discussion.
Well, first of all, I believe that anything is possible. Okay. I, again, come from the generation where I grew up in Houston, Texas, where you're from. And I used to go to NASA probably once a month with my family or with my school or whatever. And seeing what our country could do to manifest miracles like landing on the moon, I grew up with this belief that see a need, fill a need, any problem is solvable. You just have to work through the process. That's the whole idea of the scientific methodology. And I always thought that the balance of opportunity meets, just the dimensions of, innovation and things like that would always find a pathway through the madness. And I always had faith in that. What we have been in the midst of, particularly as it relates, and I want to finish off with the Biden administration, because I think this is extremely important. When Biden came into power, one of the things that I was trying to do initially was trying to connect with him on a basis of his son. I'm trying to think of his name.
You're talking about not Hunter, the one that died?
Yeah, of cancer.
I know which one. Yeah, right.
Beau Biden.
Beau Biden.
So just so you know, Beau Biden was revealing a lot of what I'm revealing to your audience. Beau Biden knew about all of the malfeasance of the financial system and had been trying to get his father to weigh in on a lot of new regulatory
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he had his father's ear, and of course he died tragically of the
brain cancer.
Yeah, from the burn pits, right? In Afghanistan, was it Afghanistan or Iraq? One of the two.
Iraq, the pits in Iraq.
Right, and that put him in a position also with Biden with Jon Stewart because they were trying to find funding for the veterans of the burn pits, I think they call them. Anyway, so and then Biden initially was like, because he had been there forever, and Biden had been the consummate politician, right? He's the guy that is the ultimate within the DNC framework, particularly from the Clintons forward when they manifested what became the Wall Street Democratic sort of marriage, right? The revolving door. It was what we call the meritocracy, right? Think about, I position Rachel Maddow, for example, as the spokesperson for the Wall Street revolving door meritocracy. Mm-hmm. She has incredible intelligence, incredible resources, a great way to tell the story, a great way to find things. And yet she chooses not to reveal the stuff we're talking about. She chooses, let me tell you, okay? Maybe that's contractual.
That's likely contractual. I mean, I can tell you a few inside stories about MSNBC, but we can't talk about it here.
Okay. Well, however it plays out, as a producer who's gone the distance to get this information, knows what she's not talking about, which is what's called obfuscation. Okay. Now, she's one of many. She's the brightest of the bunch. Lawrence O'Donnell's definitely up there as well, but they're not able to tackle the monstrosity of this corruption that emanates from the financial system, i.e. the Federal Reserve, given what I've laid out to you. So hope moving forward, but within Biden, right? So we always have this struggle. In Lincoln, it always called out to the better angels of our nature. Why? Because of what I said. Honesty and integrity and character versus hypocrisy, duplicity, and complicity. It's always the inner sanctions of the people who choose to make decisions based on the paradigm that they're in the midst of. Don't hate the player, hate the game is what they always say. But the difference, what you adequately had prescribed, was that there's a difference between the presidency, a president and the presidency, right? Mm-hmm. One is this paradigm that can exist without the president who's a figurehead, i.e. Biden, right? Because Biden, ultimately, when Biden was at the end of his presidency, when we saw the elements of, loss of memory, not being able to be as tight as he once was. He always had a stutter. Some of the other things that were obviously problematic for him. Many people were asking, and rightfully so, who's in control? Who's making this decisions?
Mm-hmm.
Well, as I played out, it's BlackRock, among others. But BlackRock's influence is ginormous. Why? Because BlackRock was put into position to manage the United States coming out of the great financial crisis that created this world that we're in. So moving forward in terms of hope, knowledge is power.
Tomorrow is where we move forward in form in with respect to hope. So I think you summarized that perfectly, Patrick Lovell. Folks, we've been listening. This, like I said, is the last part, the fourth part of our talk here, which is how the billionaire class got away with their power accumulation over the last 14 years. And in our next episode, we'll discuss what do we as a population, as a people, need to do. in that last episode. We'll kind of recap a little bit of what we spoke about, but then what we're going to talk is, remember that we are already empowered. We are already empowered. We're still empowered, that we can actually make a change. We can actually make the difference. And with us having folks revealing the truths, like we have Patrick Lovell here, I think we are on the right path. So anyhow, thank you so kindly, producer of the con, Patrick Lovell. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right once again.
Thank you, Egberto.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.